Hi everyone, welcome to Itsy Bitsy's live read of Finding Ruth by Cynthia Hamilton. Prologue. Standing by the front door, looking through the window that allowed us to see past the dining room and into the kitchen, my sister, brother, and I stood, fixated by the sight of our mother, grabbing dishes from the cupboard and hurling them to the floor, using both hands for maximum force, spitting out her grievances with a passion and a voice we didn't recognize. We were mute, our eyes wide, our mouths slack as we watched on, ducking below the window whenever she happened to turn in our direction. She may have seen us, but it had no effect on the process. She continued to rant and smash until she had either obliterated everything she found offensive or her anger had been sufficiently vented. I remember nothing about what precipitated this awesome and terrifying display of fury. My guess is we were outside playing when it began. As an adult looking back nearly 50 years, I can imagine any number of reasons for her outrage, all of them pointing to our father. She may have just learned that he had gambled away his paycheck, gotten arrested for drunk driving, again, or had found evidence of another affair. At our tender ages of 9, 6, and 4, we knew nothing of the obstacles to a happy home life that our mother had faced from the beginning of their marriage. All we could sense was that something had gone terribly wrong in our world. When at last the ear-splitting din abruptly stopped and our mother left the room, presumably to have herself a good cry, or a good think, I remember creeping into the kitchen by the way of the garage, and slightly picking up the remnants of the demolished dinnerware, the three of us bobbing up and down like little chickens as we endeavored to clean up the mess while making as little sound as possible. We may have been crying silently, I don't remember, but I do remember we had been scared into our best behavior. I also recall discovering our mother had limited her destruction to mostly the cheap stuff, leaving behind enough dishes to keep us from eating off paper plates. I remember feeling relieved that some of the treasured strangled blueberry pottery had survived. Finding those hand-printed berries at the bottom of our yellow plates and bowls was one of those rituals fond childhood memories had been founded on. Looking back at her restraint, I wonder if it had been proximity alone that had caused her to demolish the mismatched and plastic dishes, or if whatever precipitated the fit of rage had been aggravated by the fact she now found herself as a working mom with 3 young kids and an unreliable womanizer for a husband, constantly stretching every nickel as far as it would go. Did she wonder how she could have exhibited such bad behavior to have given up the solid, perhaps uneventful life with her first husband for this? Being hamstrung by debt and the obligation of children, constantly forced to appeal to her parents for help? What I came to realize about our family as I started going to sleepovers was how closed in our nucleus was. I don't remember my parents ever entertaining. The cut crystal and the silver kept wrapped in plastic, remnants of my mother's first marriage, only came out of the cupboards on Thanksgiving or Christmas. As children, we got a big thrill out of their appearance, but I wonder how long my father felt about being reminded of his wife's former life. He was a man appeared plagued by insecurity. Unlike my mother, his fits of temper were frequent and impossible to avoid, and more unfathomable when fueled by alcohol. There were numerous reasons no one ever came over to our house, and when I realized how secluded our home life was compared to that of my friends, it shamed me. By the age of 12, I understood we were different, closed down, flawed in some way not easily discernible to a child. Prior to and even after I began to feel the prison-like quality of our home, the one shared pride and joy was our mother. All children must see their mothers as beautiful. We had constant affirmation by total strangers, whether at school, the grocery store, or the laundromat. Men and women alike would lean over and tell us how lucky we were to have such a beautiful mother. It was both her blessing and her curse, the thing that drew men to her solely for her exterior. It's what had prompted some of them to fall to their knees and beg her to marry them. If you go through life with a face that infatuates people, your only saving grace must be having confidence in your character, your mind, and your intentions as a human being. You also need to have enough cynicism to realize who's sincere and who's looking out for their own best interests. Having been raised by good, God-fearing Lutherans, I think the romantic, sensitive side of my mother was probably kept in check by the ingrained belief that no one could never stop humbling themselves and doing for others. I think she gradually came to understand why men were so attracted to her, but she lacked the ability to screen out those who were sincere in their feelings for her from those who saw her as everything they had to possess. I don't believe she had the awareness that people could be drawn to her solely for her looks. I only know for certain that for her being beautiful was more of a liability than a blessing. I've recently come to the understanding that memory is a fragile thing. If it is not preserved by frequent examination, you might find it has dried to dust and is apt to scatter into the air, lost except for mere outline it has left behind. If the memory is only a placeholder for future detail between facts, then further fleshing out can become more speculation than truth, especially if it's the rightful owner of those memories has lost the ability to see into the past. What I have learned in the last few years is if you don't ask while you have the chance, your parents' past may become more fiction than fact. Chapter 1. In a distracted state of mind. Ruth paused for a second to straighten her hat before pushing through the plate-glass door. As it closed behind her, the crisp, late winter air of the outdoors was replaced with the warm, heavily scented humidity of a beauty parlor during peak hours. "Someone will be right with you," a woman called over her shoulder after catching Ruth's reflection in the mirror along the back wall. The buzz of the beauticians and the clientele absolutely halted as they regarded the stranger in their midst. Ruth let her eyes roam everywhere as she framed ignorance of the curious stares. Realizing no one was coming immediately to her assistant, she took a seat with her back to the street and busied herself by going through the contents of her handbag. After a quick appraisal, the 5 customers in various stages of beautification and the 4 stylists resumed their conversations. Only Maurice, the proprietor, kept a watch on this stunning new face. After fingering his client's hair into bold waves around her face, he held his hand above her brows before he set the style with a blast of hairspray. "Close your eyes," he said, interrupting a story he had suddenly lost interest in. "What do you think?" He asked as he handed the freshly minted platinum blonde a hand mirror and turned her chair around so she could take in the back of her head. "I hardly recognize myself," she said, awestruck by the transformation. "You could have some fun with Ronald," Mrs. Latimer quipped before returning her attention to her movie magazine. "Stand up, Betty. I can't see it," the patron on the end complained. Maurice shriveled the chair back around and removed the cloth drape. With a smile of delight spreading across her features, Mrs. Andrews stood and affected several starlight poses for her audience. "Bravo! Darling! I told you you'd look like Marilyn Monroe if you went lighter and shorter, doesn't she?" "I don't know about that, Trish," Betty automatically replied, though she had a hard time taking her eyes off her newly glamorized image. "You look 10 years younger," Louise said, confidentially as she escorted Mrs. Andrews to the front desk to collect her payment. "Are you here to see Maurice?" she asked the newcomer while she rang up her boss's last customer. "Yes," Ruth replied. "He'll be right with you," Louise said. The well-rehearsed reason behind her appointment died on Ruth's lips as the conversation resumed without her. Mrs. Patterson? Maurice asked as he materialized to her right. His smile couldn't have been interpreted as cordial or swarmy or predatory, depending on the recipient's point of view. Yes, Ruth replied, far too eagerly for her own comfort, startled as she was by his sudden appearance. I'm here to get my hair done for the charity luncheon tomorrow. She stood up self-consciously, finding herself outside the element she had become accustomed to. Marrying into a prominent Wichita family, it had been possible to glide through her daily life without explaining who she was or where she fit in the scheme of things. Rarely did she venture outside the circle that swallowed her when she became Mrs. John Blakely Patterson, Jr. Generally, those she encountered at the museum, country club, shopping, or out dining all knew who she was, usually without having been introduced. It came with the turf, as did doing what was expected of her. She was a Patterson now, a privileged and somewhat confining role. Only on rare occasions such as these was she reminded of her lofty position in society. Having to present herself without her acquired pedigree paving the way put her at a psychological disadvantage. What she lacked in confidence, though, this man made up for in spades. The hairdresser she usually saw, Lawrence, a man considered a wizard by her mother-in-law's set, was aloof and older than this Maurice by at least 10 years, a prima donna too infatuated with his own importance to be interested in anything his clientele had to say. At first sight, Maurice appeared to be the exact opposite. He was dark-haired and precarious. The slight gap between his front teeth gave his grin a rakish sincerity. His smile said he didn't take himself or anyone else too seriously. Maurice extended his arm to indicate the recently vacated chair, but his smile faltered as he became distracted by the vibes from the gaggle of nosy onlookers as Ruth followed his cue. He felt 8 sets of eyes following his new creature, well-groomed and elegant, her ingrained poise and erect posture making her seem as out of place in his humble salon as a thoroughbred giving pony rides. As Ruth headed toward the chair, Maurice changed her course. "Is the back room clean?" he asked his staff at large. "It should be," one of his stylists answered. "No one's been in there today." "Too claustrophobic in here," Maurice said under his breath, as he guided Ruth toward a hallway separated from the main salon by a heavy barricade drapery. Ruth glanced over her shoulder once Maurice had taken the lead. Looking back at the roomful of curious stares, her heartbeat thudded in her ears, and the acute embarrassment washed over her. She felt as though everyone knew what was going on except her. "After you," Maurice said, his back to the door as he stood out of the way, seemingly obvious to his new client's discomfort. Weak sunlight from a grimy alley window gave the small room an even more closed-in feeling. He flipped on an overhead light, revealing a single sink, hydraulic chair, and a hooded hairdryer on one side, a worn leather sofa, coffee table, and a makeshift wet bar on the other. Ruth turned toward Maurice, her expression both confused and alarmed. Thank you for listening to this portion.